रवींद्र गाडगीळ UK.
आनंद,
Yes.
रवी गाडगीळ, मी लोकांना ऍडमिट करतो लोकांना.
ओके, गुड 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 गुड. एक 3-4 मिनिटांनी चालू करतो. रवींद्र, दीपक डोळस दिसला? रवींद्र, गुड. अविनाश, चालू करूया?
Yes, Anand.
Yeah.
Start. Yeah.
ओके. नमस्कार, मी आनंद कानू, गर्जे मराठी ग्लोबलच्या तर्फे आपल्या सगळ्यांचं स्वागत करतो. गर्जे मराठी ग्लोबलनी इनोव्हेशन अकॅडमी हा जो प्रोग्राम चालू केला आहे त्याच्या अंतर्गत आजचा हा 5वा वेबिनार आहे. ह्या प्रोग्रामविषयी, त्याचप्रमाणे आजचे अत्यंत रिस्पेक्टेड असे गेस्ट श्रीकांत निस्थाने आहेत, त्यांच्याविषयी सांगण्यासाठी श्रीयुत अविनाश काळे येतील. हा प्रोग्राम अनेक जणांच्या इंटेलेक्च्युअल इनपुट्सनी आणि अनेक जणांच्या सहकार्याने चालू झालेला आहे. आमची जी कमिटी आहे त्याच्यामध्ये सुद्धा श्रीकांत निस्थाने आहेत. अविनाश, कॅन यू प्लीज टेक ओव्हर फ्रॉम हिअर?
Yes, sure, Anand. So I will just quickly put the screen one pager on the. So good day to all. Welcome to Garje Marathi Innovation Academy webinar series. This is our 5th webinar of this series, which is basically catering help or guiding to aspiring entrepreneurs on both technology tracks and business tracks. We have covered up very interesting topics in both these tracks, a range of the topics. We have recently covered Internet of Things. We have covered 5G and new opportunities on technology track. On the business track, we have completed design thinking, idea validation, and market sizing. And I'm glad to welcome you all on our 5th webinar today, which is on mobility, which will be presented by our mentor, one of the mentor group member, Shrikant Nistane, based in New Jersey, US. Who will be taking us through a mobility experience. He's basically founder and CEO of Crave Infotech, where he has been partnering with companies like SAP, Zebra, and Here Technologies. And he has been helping his global customers on realizing the digital transformation goals, which is a trend for the world today. And I think we are excited to look forward and hear from Shrikant about this topic. And I hope this will be useful for the entrepreneurs on the call here. I would like request Shrikant to take over from me and I will moderate the Q&A towards the end of this session. And I will stop my presentation. Hello?
Yeah, over to Sri Srikant Nistane.
Over to Srikant. Yeah.
Please, everybody stay mute and ask your questions in chat. Over to Nistane, sir. Nistane? Hello?
We have to unmute.
Okay.
Oh, he's trying to be.
No, he
Yeah,
can
it's trying
mute
to
himself.
unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dhanyawad, Avi. Dhanyawad, Mr. Ganu. And thank you for organizing this. This is definitely a very good initiative, especially focusing on Maharashtrians. I know it's we doing something to work together is always a miracle. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. So I'm going to talk about mobility is kind of an old topic now, but let's see how we can make it interesting. Let me share my screen. So this is what I set as an agenda. We can also get into other areas. I haven't put anything more around the entrepreneurship, but we can talk about that. So evolution of mobility, consumer versus enterprise mobility. I was hoping that there will be more audience from, I don't know how many of these are from the colleges. So this might be helpful for them. This is not something new for a lot of people who are already into the industry. Oops. So this is how I look like in case I think my video is on today. A lot of times we don't have videos. I'm an SGGS College of Nanded and also the Babson in Boston alumni. I'm involved with multiple startups and the organization and investment. I was fortunate and I like to do that. Digital transformation is my core. So we work with a lot of global organizations. We help them to do digital transformation using SAP and then Zebra and here technology. Yeah, I just said I love working with SAP. It's been around 27 years now. I'm also involved with some level of helping people. So we are sponsoring, we call hostel, a home for underprivileged kids. There are, I think, as of this year, we have around 52 kids who stay there. And we were lucky to have opportunity to help them out with their life. Pretty closely involved with Thai and also the India Spora.org. So these two organizations, I like to work with them, see where we can add value. So let's get into the topic. So we all know how the mobility evolved, right? So it's early 70s, late 70s, 80s, and then slowly they evolved until they got into a shape in early 90s to a phone which looks like onto the right-hand side. So it has gone through many. I remember when there was a screen available where you can play games. We used to play those games. And I have a slide where we talk about how the games evolved. It was a big joy. Those initial mobile phones and what we can do through that small screen. It was a big innovation for everybody because we were able to not only talk, but we were also see some information on the screens. Then the smartphones came. So mid 95, the first smartphone came. The Blackberry was the big news for everybody. It was mainly used in enterprise or commercial world where people will use for business purposes. And that was the first wireless handheld computer with RIM 850. was announced in 1999. It was just a text-based mobile application. There wasn't, it was a talking and the text, but there was a lot of hype and people used to enjoy that. I remember watching people using Blackberries and constantly communicating, and it was probably the um, most sophisticated tool available for business people to use. And then came November 2000, the first camera phone was launched. In late 2003, basically Nokia was the leader in the mobile hardware space. Nokia 1100 was released, and that became the best-selling mobile phone of all time. Then, of course, Steve Jobs was ready to disrupt the technology and the mobility landscape one more time, and he unveiled Apple, and the whole thing changed. I believe that Apple iPhone was the single most biggest disruption of this era, which changed everything, how we operate. Means before 2007, the life was equally good. Means we were able to operate through usual communication. People were okay to have communication or the response after a few hours, but that completely changed after iPhone came. The messaging, the video, the ability to do so many things, and it has put a lot of change into the human life and also into the technology stack. Of course, after that, Android came in, and Android was adopted by so many companies, and Samsung was one of the early adopters, and they step up and they matched what iPhone had, and they came up with a lot of innovative products out, and they became, by 2016, Samsung became the number one smartphone vendor in the market. So if you see, in the meantime, operating systems like Windows Mobile basically died. They couldn't keep up with the pace. Of course, Microsoft is a huge organization. Mobile phone wasn't a big focus for them, or they didn't catch up, and they basically died in that whole space. So that had a lot of impact on enterprise side, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's how the smartphones evolve, which has basically changed our life. I don't know how many of you are aware about the enterprise mobility. So there is a huge difference, a clear-cut difference between the consumer mobility and enterprise. So what we discussed before is all consumer mobility, and there is a separate world for enterprise mobility. So if you live in US or any developed countries, and if somebody comes to your house, especially from the delivery point of view, so it can be DHL or any courier, or you go into the warehouses, you go into the departmental stores, you will find people with these kind of devices, and they are specially meant for specific purposes. So they are rugged in nature. So they have specific IP protections. So there are a lot of certifications available. So they are treated as IP 55, 50, 55, 60, 65, 67. And they all talk about how these devices withstand. So the parameters are the drop from the height. So it can be 3 feet, 6 feet, 10 feet. Also water resistance, and either they are water resistant or they are water immersible. So there are devices which are used underwater, so they withstand certain water height and pressure. So this is a completely different world. the applications. Now, it used to be big on Windows Mobile. It has been shifted to Android. The shift is almost now 70-30 because there is a lot of install base of these devices. The key difference between these two device families is that consumer devices are, of course, they are less expensive. You can get smartphone these days for $50. If you go to the developing countries, you can get it for $50. And they might range. I mean, iOS is Apple devices can go up to 1,000, but these devices basically they start from 500, 600 because of the nature and how they are built. Mostly now, most of the devices are on Android because it's an easy operating system to customize, and there are a lot of development platforms available. Also, another reason to move to Android is there is a good amount of choice of hardware because Android is commonly used platform like Windows. So there are many companies who produce hardware around this particular technology. So if you look at these devices, there are handheld computers, wearable computers, vehicle mount computers, called VMC. There are now rugged tablets. And then finally, there are RFID is another technology which is out. I'm sure you guys have heard about it, but this is radio frequency identification. This technology helps you to identify where specific tagged, it can be a person, it can be any physical item, moving item. And then these devices, because there are two types of RFIDs. There's the passive and active RFID. So the passive RFIDs basically don't emit the data, but they can be read when you are close to them. But the active RFIDs basically send the information telling, here I am at a predetermined frequency. And then there are RFID readers who catch that information and then they collate that information for a specific purpose. So that's a difference between the consumer and the enterprise mobility. I'm sure somebody might say, I talked about Windows, I talked about Android. What about iOS? iOS is also now getting into enterprise mobility. Of course, the limitation is there's only one company who manufactures. There are a lot of limitations from the Apple store perspective, like how they upgrade the upgrades, and the last point is about the rugged nature of the devices. But there are a lot of options available. They are rugged casings. They go around Apple devices, and they make them compatible to work with Apple. But still, it is way behind, probably single-digit penetration into this industry. These are just examples where people probably use. So in the warehouses, so people use these devices for creating inventory, maintaining inventory. When they sell, you probably will see them. This is an example. You might see them into your departmental store. These are also coming into smaller devices now with the lower drop point. And then also they can be into the forklift. They are mounted in the forklift. These are mainly used for business transactions. So this can be warehouse specific transaction. This can be asset management specific transactions. And the key difference is they need to be built around business process for a specific customer, integrating with a specific backend. When I say backend, means it can be a ERP, it can be any other system which manages those processes. Excuse me. So they are very specific to a customer. They are very specific to processes compared to the consumer application. Consumer applications are pretty much open. Let me open this link. I found a very interesting link. I thought it might be helpful. So this link talks about the evolution of the mobile apps. So I was talking about 1994 had 10 inbuilt apps, so they used to come as app. They were not called app. They were basically some tools they were giving along with the mobile phone. So then came this snake game, right? This was the first game we were able to play on that such a small window, and we were happy because we had something to play. If you're sitting on a flight or if you're somewhere in a bus, there was something to do other than staring out. Of course, apps were not fancy. Then came the first iPhone, right? We changed everything. Third-party apps were welcome. So Apple allowed people to create apps. And I remember when the iTunes store was launched, there were like 10 million apps downloaded in the first 3 days. So that was amazing. The framework they developed, framework they provided was really good for it to be, for developers to create anything. It doesn't have to be a developer, anybody is able to create apps now. So App Store went live in 2008, 10 million downloads in 1 week. This is Steve Jobs. And then everything changed. People were able to develop apps, sell them, set their own price, and the innovation just flourished. There was no limitation, which is today. Anybody can develop an app. If you have an idea, you can sell that idea through the app, and people will buy that. So it went from a small user base to a global user base instantaneously because everybody had access to the tool set. This is the kid saying, this is the best day of my life. We probably downloaded an app. So I thought this was a very good, they're missing some of the screenshots. I don't know why. But now the app started reaching millions of downloads in few days. And I like this last one is, so now apps are available on, so now we went from a larger screen to much smaller screen. So all the smartphones, smart watches also have the apps now. And you can basically control, this is one of my personal secrets. I think this is way before, like probably 20-25 years back. I used to dream that I can control my phone from a watch, and that became true now 100%. You can control almost everything from your watch for the phone. Now you can even speak through the watch. So what's next, right? There's more to come, probably beyond our imagination. So smartphone industry is growing rapidly, of course, and there are more and more functionalities available for us to do as much as possible, and it opens up just Pandora for everybody to take advantage of what's going on. Go back to the presentation. So let's talk about how you can choose what's the right stack for your mobile app. This is always a challenge, and you have to go through some selection parameters before you decide on what's good for you and how you choose them. So what I've seen is, of course, you have to decide whether it's native or hybrid, because there are specific applications they drive whether you need a native application or a hybrid application. Then who is your user base? So if it is a consumer-based application, then anybody can use, right? So you need to develop an application. So a lot of times people choose, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the native versus hybrid. So you can have Android user base, iOS, Windows user base is not there now, unless it's a commercial application. And then you also need to look at whether it's a commercial versus an industrial application. Commercial versus an consumer application. I should have said consumer. And then what are the data storage needs? And last is whether it's offline or online. So most of the application we use on our phones, so they are not offline. And when I say they're not offline, means they cannot perform all the transactions without connectivity. A lot of times, if you lose connectivity, your app will just show you whatever you have. It's basically caching locally, but cannot do all the functions offline. So native versus hybrid is, if you want to develop an application which need a lot of native functionality, like accessing camera, accessing your GPS, accessing image, you have to use native functionality, and then the native application becomes more helpful. But if you don't have that need and you just need a browser-based application which can be accessed, the same code base can be accessed by all the different operating system, then we typically use hybrid approach. There are a few hybrid good technologies available in the market right now. Of course, React Native, now Flutter is the new one. But in addition to that, you have Accelerator. There is a Microsoft technology. There are a couple of Microsoft stack available for hybrid, which is typically used. They also come up with some plugins which will allow you to use some basic functionality like scanning and camera, but they don't give you complete flexibility to develop application like you can have. There are specific native features are released by Apple and Android. They are only available if you develop native. Data storage. So if you have a need for storing data locally, of course, then you have to look at how you're going to cache the data, and also finally the offline. So we into the consumer or commercial world, not consumer, the commercial world, there are specific applications where there is a need for offline. And then we have to develop them very differently because your complete interface changes, because you need to store certain amount of data, certain type of data, so that even if you don't have connectivity, the application should continue working. The mobility is definitely a rapid pace phenomena. If you look at typical release cycle, Google releases new operating system every year, every 3 months actually, and every year major release. And then they basically do not support anything which is more than 3 release old. So they basically are saying that your technology is unsupported, or technology unsupported within 2 to 3 years time frame. So that creates a lot of challenge. In addition to that, hardware is constantly changing. There is a big push of cramping every potential functionality into a smaller and smaller size phones. So that creates a lot of challenge for hardware vendors, mobile phone manufacturing companies, and also for mainly for the software development vendors. It's just constantly changing. So whoever hasn't kept up with it, and one of the big example is Nokia, right? They couldn't figure out when they went out, basically out of business. We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. So this is a very interesting story. There are a lot of business cases around this into the B school. Nokia was on the top of the world. By 2005, they were the largest cell phone manufacturer in the world. They decided to make some changes in their organization, and it just didn't work out. They were not agile enough. They kept ignoring what's going on. I mean, of course, all these companies knows who is working on what. They completely ignored, even after iPhone was launched, they ignored and they kept saying, no, this will work. It's the same scenario like what happened with Kodak. So they continue to show that they didn't listen to customers, they didn't listen to the market, and they basically literally went out of the business. The similar thing happened with the Blackberry. Blackberry went from a controlling smartphone market to the phone of the past. I mean, these company is almost they are basically out of business. They used to control 50% of the smartphone market, as we have seen very recently, and 20% global at one point of time. In spite of that, even after iPhone came, they kept thinking that business user will continue to use. They love our user interface. They love how we operate, and that didn't happen. A lot of functionalities which came into the iOS and then later came into all the Android phones, they just killed Blackberry business. Then after that, Blackberry did try to come back. They released few versions, but it was too late and too little. So they went out of the business. So this clearly indicates, there are several other examples, but it clearly indicates that it's a rapid pace phenomena. You have to watch it very closely. You have to be on the toes, and you have to listen to your customers. So there are two types of customers again. There are consumers like users like us. We typically change phone couple years. 2 years is a typical cycle, but sometimes maybe longer, some people earlier. And they are hungry. They need new information, new functionalities, and it has to be available to keep up with the market pace. But having said that, if you go to the consumer, to go to the industrial business, enterprise business, it's very different, because enterprise business, as I mentioned, the hardware is expensive. It takes a lot of time to develop the solutions. Change management is difficult or painful, not difficult, painful. So their replacement cycle is anywhere between 5 to 7 years. So they have to basically get the ROI and make sure the investment is realized. And once their depreciation becomes close to zero, they are ready to invest into the new. So there is a very special provision. If you look at companies like Zebra, Honeywell, and Panasonic, they are the leaders into the commercial world. They have special arrangement with companies like Google, where even if the operating system is out of the support, they have special arrangement by which they provide support for, especially for securities and any bugs, but mainly for security and vulnerability. So that helps them not only to get better pricing for this hardware, but also help consumers to utilize these devices. I mean, I know companies who are using these devices for 10 years, 15 years. These devices are so strong and rugged, you can throw them from 10 feet, 15 feet, and they will still survive without any dent. So now, one of the bigger issue with mobility is security. In case of, we all hear, right, that Visa, even I think a couple of days back, there was a news that Microsoft, there was a leak. So security threat is always there. Everybody tries to keep up with the vulnerability patches and the fixes which are available, but it's always difficult because there are people who are working every day tirelessly to break what is available. So what are the security threats? Data leak, unsecured Wi-Fi's, network spoofing, phishing attacks, spyware, broken cryptography, improper session handling. So again, it's very clearly different between the consumer world and the industrial world. So if you look at ourselves, we completely rely on our hardware vendor and the operating system to provide us help. So especially when banks build their application, it has to be extremely tight. Now the control is not just on the mobile app, but also handled into the backend. So whenever these companies build their applications, they have to ensure that all of this is controlled not only on the front end, also into the backend. But there are many other applications which ask for your consent, collect your information. That information is used for various purposes. So there are several ways mobiles can be threatened. So as we all know, it has to be very, very controlled how you use the mobile application. As a user, how much information we save, what goes into the cache, what doesn't go into the cache. But from the mobile developer perspective, you have to be extremely cautious about, and I have another slide which talks about what are the different mechanisms available, but you have to ensure that you use the right technologies, right plugins to secure your applications from so many things happening. So there are a lot of paid and unpaid plugins available which you can use to secure your applications from different threats. Now, talking about how you can ensure that the mobile app is secured. So there are several tests available. It's called VAPT is a commonly industry term, vulnerability assessment and proliferation test. So that's a common test used by industry to identify 4 key things. One is, of course, your password control has to be tight. Then the data has to be encrypted. So if it is this is very critical and important into the industrial application, that the key data has to be integrated. There are a lot of standards around this depending upon the industry. If you are working with federal or government entities or healthcare entities where there are specific information like your individual ID. In India, it can be Aadhaar card. In US, it's a social security number, your name, your location, your address. They all needs to be encrypted so that you understand and you follow certain standards. Another is code obfuscation. So that's basically ensuring that your code is not open for anybody to access. And if your code is open, they can manipulate the code and do whatever they want. For example, if you are developing an application for e-commerce, and if your code is not properly secured, somebody can change the code and take the money to his own account, or enforce and change the pricing. So this has happened with the people. So you have to make sure your code is properly secured. And finally, there is a secured layer. So SSL and HDFS based communication has to be extremely secured. So there is a proper secured layer is created so that anybody from the outside cannot penetrate through your code, or while the data is in flight, or while the communication is happening between the front end, the mobile application and the data servers. Then once you have the app ready, you identified how you want to develop the app, you have identified which technology you want to use, then it comes and you have an app ready, it comes for the deployment. There are many ways you can deploy apps. So if you look at, I'm again going to talk about the commercial and the consumer base. So if you look at the consumer, you have to again find out who you are targeting to. Is it Android, iOS, Windows? Whether it's a commercial, it's industrial. I think again I made so it's a consumer or industrial, and whether it's offline or online. Now, once you have that, you have 2 choices, right? You have a Microsoft App Store, you have Google App Store, and you have Apple iOS App Store. So these 3, so depending upon your user base, you have to go through these app stores, and once they are published, nowadays, especially Apple has tightened a lot of controls into the App Store. They want to know everything about your app. They want to know why it's used, how it's used, and they want to look at your code. And for good of everybody, they have really tightened the control mechanism. So does Android, but I think Apple is ahead. And then you basically publish those apps, and once they are published, they become available for people to download and use them. Then if you look at the consumer, the commercial, it's slightly different because your users are within the network of your organization, your company or enterprise, and you don't want your apps to be outside so anybody can download. They are very controlled. There is something called at mobile device management. It's called MDM. And this is the list of top 20 MDM solutions available. And mostly known, Intune is owned by Microsoft. Then AirWatch is another one which is very popular at number 7. There's another one called SOTI. This number 18. SOTI is also very popular. So these are the apps which are typically, they allow organization to have their own app store. And so this is going from enterprise app store to the organization app store, and then publish their apps, and their organization employees or the authorized users can download from there. This does a lot much more than just the app download. It helps them to manage the version control. It helps them to manage the download. It also now gone to a level where they can find out whose battery is low and who is using which application screen, how many times. So there are a lot of statistics available which can identify how is the adoption of those applications within the organization, and that is help to increase or create a strategy around adoption of the specific application within the corporate. That's called MDM. Now, another part which I should have probably discussed earlier, but when you are working on an application, UI/UX is very important. It plays a big role. You can have best functionalities available, but if your user interface is not good, the adoption is going to be extremely poor. And there are many techniques, many technologies and thought process available around UI/UX. If you look at this screen and the image, so usability, information architecture, interaction design, wireframing, and visual design. These are key parameters of the UI/UX. And then they all play collective role into bringing in something which is going to look nice. And there is something called wireframing is a big topic, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the design thinking. So I think we had earlier we had a session, and design thinking is very big these days because it helps you. So there is to be, we call detailed design or blueprinting. These are the typical words we used to use in any project methodology, and now it's all about design thinking because it's even broken down further. There are many checkpoints. If you look at the on the top, so discover, design, and deliver. So discover is understanding the scope, 360-degree research of what is the scope is, synthesize the scope, ideate the scope, prototype. So there is a big play here for now is for empathy. People realize that we have applications, olden days, and they are developed and we had only limited choice like a license Raj. And we just live with that. That's no longer the world. There is too much choice, and if you are not appealing, and if you're not user friendly, it's not going to work. So UI is basically user interface, and UX is basically user experience. So user experience, what used to be before few years is the user interface, but now user experience plays much wider role into the design of any mobile application. Coming back to the UI/UX, I believe in the design thinking, it's basically wireframing, understanding the user base, understanding the how they will operate, what are their pain points, and then design the application user interface based upon the pain point of the user base. That's basically core of the design thinking. And then prototyping them, and then perfecting them as you go through the prototyping, and make it usable so that you also look at the demographics, you also look at the gender, you also look at the age group, where you are, who is your target, and how they operate, how they see a specific topic, and design the user interface based upon that. So that's all I wanted to cover into the mobility. Now, I don't have any slides, but from the entrepreneurship perspective, I mean, this is definitely a big area where there is a lot of demand. Mobility still is one of the top 3 digital transformation areas. There is a huge opportunity into this space, whether it's a consumer or industrial, especially in industrial. See, the industry is always 5 years behind the consumer market because one is the change management, the adoption, and it has long-lasting impact because you cannot sacrifice production or the manufacturing or the business just because you need to adopt new technology. In the consumer world, I can buy a phone, and if it doesn't work, I can go back to, but it's just one individual. That's not the case into the enterprise. It's the whole organization can get impacted. So there is always a lag, and now the lot of organization have, there are some industries who were extremely challenged because of the competition. For example, retail, hospitality, they were highly challenged, and they adopted mobility much quicker than the other industries. But there are some industries who still enjoy a lot of margin, and they are typically challenged by regulations. So if you look at life sciences, there is a huge room for digital transformation, mobility. Same with healthcare. Another area, industry which is a little bit behind is the utilities, or we call energy industry. So oil and gas, utilities, they are still behind on mobility, and they are slowly catching up. So there is a lot of room for mobility to flourish into the marketplace. And of course, with the consumer side of it, with the availability of the app stores, then there's opportunity for anybody to create a baseline. If you see the apps like WhatsApp and Facebook, then Airbnb and Uber, I mean, these are all just app-based businesses, and they are valued at multi-billion dollars. So that clearly indicates what level of opportunity is there if you have a right idea, right app, and right approach. So with that, I'll open up. If you have any specific question, I'll be happy to answer those, or you can just, we can also have follow-up if needed.
Okay, thanks a lot, Srikant. Extremely good presentation. Avinash, can you please take over? Yeah.
Thanks, Srikant, for taking us back to 2 decades and explaining the evolution of the mobility. Definitely, I think the battery operated device has taken over a lot of application, a lot of use cases, and it has given the convenience and comfort to the end user. One question which is there related to conversions or area where healthcare or medical comes, what are your thought process on how mobility can be useful in healthcare domain, especially in current scenario where telehealth is becoming so popular?
Srikant, please stop sharing your screen, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So healthcare has huge opportunities. I mean, if you look at current healthcare scenario, means telehealth is, of course, is an upcoming area. I mean, the only limitation in the healthcare is the regulation and the insurance companies. Those are the only, I see those are the 2 key stumbling blocks, why that industry adoption, the mobility or adoption is limited, because regulations are driven by insurance companies, and insurance company needs to get paid, and they need controls whereby they can see where are the touch points. There are so if you look at inside the hospital itself, the mobile penetration is actually that has gone up like anything during the pandemic. I can tell you all of these enterprise mobile companies were so worried when COVID hit, but they all actually exceeded their numbers when everybody else was going down, just because of the healthcare. 60% of their business came from healthcare, and remaining 40% from everybody else. I think remaining 20-25% was from e-commerce, distribution or logistics side, but healthcare, because they didn't want to touch anybody. So in order to minimize touch point, everything went into the mobility. There is still a lot of opportunities inside the hospital, telehealth, again, how the doctors use their, doctor is one of the other community where the usage of the applications is very limited. They still like to type, they still like to write, not type. So that community is another community which has a lot of opportunities to, I hope there is no doctor, if he's there, he's not gonna take offense of this, but there is opportunity to, yeah, we have a hospital management software, and I see my team always struggling how to get through doctors and penetrate through that market.
True. Thanks, Shrikant. Definitely, I think regulation and privacy is definitely a big concern on mobility in healthcare. Definitely, right.
Yeah.
So with this, do you want to share some other innovations which is coming here, like flex displays which are coming in mobility now, as well as any applications for blind people on mobility, or basically on the voice-based areas, or
Yes. Yeah, I didn't touch base on that. So I think the next, so augmented reality and voice to text is another big area where there is a lot of development. So now, if you look at Siri, when I monitor this, I used to use 6 years, and I think 80% of the time Siri couldn't understand what I'm saying. And then the new 10 came, and it just 95% time it understand what I'm saying. So it's a day and night difference. So there is a lot of investment into the because of the AI and machine learning. There are now better hardware and better computing power, and also better tools available, which allows us to utilize the. So now this is also, as I mentioned, it's also penetrating into the commercial business. We have now voice activated, what we call voice picking. So the picking in the warehouse is happening through the voice, so that people can use their both hands, so that there is a better productivity. Then we have smart glasses used into the warehouses. But these are very simple examples where the person who is picking can see which aisle I need to go. And the same is been utilized into the asset management. It's utilized into anywhere. Means R&Ds. We are now working with some R&D organization. R&D is another organization which is not where they are supposed to be through the mobility. They just want to focus on research and development, and their sample sizes are small. So there is a lot of innovation going on in that area, where barcode enablement and voice picking is helping them, because there are hazardous chemicals, hazardous materials, and they want to do it by avoiding touch points. So yes, there's a lot of, especially these are all driven by the mobile device manufacturer, right? Who are depending upon what's available into the memory and the processor side. So that whole cycle is definitely helping to utilize them more and more onto the application side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, Ross.
So, Anandji, you want to
So we
take over
can
and
end the
announce?
meeting. Yeah, we can end the meeting. It was a really good presentation.